Hi, everybody. We are so excited to get started this year. Our team is all reported, and I think the biggest thing that they're looking forward to this season is to now be the new kids on the block, right? Heading into last year, everybody was discounting us, thinking that we were just going to limp our way into the Big 12, and I think we started off with a bang, starting off 7-0 in conference after coming off a 10-2 preseason record. And so I think we got some momentum rolling for us, and it was as expected for us. You know, we have a culture of winning, and so we were ready to go and ready to prove everybody wrong at that point. And we hit some bumps in the middle of the season last year, and I think, you know, it's a grueling 5 months, and to face your top 25 teams day in and day out in that second half was no easy mix. And so for us, I think we knew what to expect, but you still have to go through it. And I think we learned a lot. And the resounding themes that I heard this year is they're focused, they're ready to earn everything, and doesn't matter whether we're ranked first, 15th, 11th is where they put us this year. For us, it's about the people in the room and being able to earn everything they get.
Coach, what has it been like to the impact on the people in the room? Because you've had the Orlando Valkyries now in town for a little while, and obviously with professional volleyball in the U.S. being what it is, what has it been like to kind of have that atmosphere for your team over the course of these past several months of this year?
Sure. The energy was electric, in addition financial, and it was great for our players to be able to see that, especially having one of our own Knights in their uniform in Abby Hansen. And so for us, there was a deep connection there, and it's great for our young women to have something to aspire to. Sure, they've always aspired to play overseas, and we have some currently playing overseas as well, but to have it right here on your campus, I think it just really hits close to home. And now we have some of our current athletes having those aspirations, especially those that don't want to go overseas.
Coach, what's the biggest thing you learned about your team throughout year one in the Big 12?
Well, on one hand, we kind of already knew that we had a lot of grit, but to really see us produce in the Big 12, I think it was, and play and compete against anybody. You know, we kind of got hit that losing streak rut, and then you're facing the defending national champs. And to play like we did, even if we didn't come out with a W, to see that grit and that heart, that competitiveness, even at the end of the season, we were playing for something on the very last day in that match against Kansas on the road, which was no easy task. They're a Sweet 16 team. And I think on one hand, I kind of knew that, but to see us be able to produce, I knew we had the guts inside of ourselves to go after it, but to be able to do it and compete with the best of the best, I think we proved a lot to ourselves that we could do this to carry into year two.
You're not the new kids on the block anymore, but the Big 12 does have a new look for the second year in a row. How will those teams being added kind of mix this thing up a little bit?
Well, you know, they're coming in from another Power Four conference, right, which no longer exists, but they're not going to be a walk in the park. We know not to take any single team for granted. And I don't think we did that last year either. I think, if anything, we proved that we can't be taken for granted either. And so that was mentioned already in our first team meeting, that we're not the new kids on the block. Now we're going to welcome them in, and they better be ready.
And to be picked 11th, that's the lower third. That's kind of stick a little bit and be motivated.
Sure it does, right? We know what it is as a program to be the targeted, but now whether you put yourself in that position to feel that pressure or not, it doesn't matter. You know, we're going to go in with a chip on our shoulder, because I think that's UCF in general. I think we as a university, as an athletics department, are used to being discounted, and we're still newish to, right, the big kids sandbox and in a power conference, right? And so for us, we're going to have the chip on our shoulder whether we're ranked, regardless of where we're ranked at this point. So for us, it's about trying to avoid that distraction and that noise, and just going in and earning it.
Now that you've had
success in the American and the dominance in the American, is that disrespectful to be that low?
No, in the sense that we finished with a winning record, but we were still tied for 8th. We finished ahead of where we were predicted to finish last year. So for us, we're gunning for everything again this year. And so, yeah, I think that carries a little bit of chip on our shoulder, but for us, it's more about proving it to each other day in and day out.
Now that you have a season of Big 12 results to reflect on, what would you say your biggest response has been to the offseason now that you have some actual tangible, film, Big 12 film to look at as you now prepare for this season?
Yeah, we've already even discussed, it's one thing to know it, it's another to having been through it. Just the level of intensity and preparation day in and day out. We were used to playing Power 5 and even beating Power 5 teams when there was a Power 5. But we did that for 4 weeks in the preseason, and we didn't have to do that all the way through the end of November. And so our preparation, I think, was as much physical as it was mental to be able to continue to recruit players that can grind that entire time.
You mentioned, obviously, Abby playing for the pro now. That'll be one of the big questions the volleyball will be asking all year about. Abby and Claudia up the middle. How did the middle look now this year with Abby and Claudia now graduating?
Right. Well, we added a transfer in Alexia Kuhl, who came from one of the newbies into our conference this year. So we're excited about having her knowledge of, being a buff for the last 5 years. And so she gives us a very different dynamic in her physicality and her height at 6'7". So we're super excited about having her in our program and just her level of knowledge as well as physicality. And then we had 2 red shirts, one of whom could play even on a pin for us in Sasha Cohen. So that'll be determined. We haven't started practice yet, but we had some tremendous growth in those 2 players during the spring season. And we'll see what they've been doing all summer, too, to figure out what's going to be the best product on the floor.
Coach, how close is this program right now to where you want it to be?
Oh, I'd say nowhere close. It's hard to peak for 5 months, right? We want to be peaking at the right time and heading into conference. So, during the preseason before even the pre-conference competition begins, we have a lot to figure out. It's kind of nice having 2 full weeks of classes, which that usually doesn't happen. We can kind of take our time to settle in after that first full week of double days and whatnot. And so for us, there's going to be a tremendous amount of learning that's happening, of figuring out what's going to be the best team and the best system of offense and defense for us. It's going to look very different, even if we're not adding a ton of new players or new faces. It could look very different than last year. And so we still have a lot to figure out.
You talked about the bump in the road last year. How have you seen your team respond to that this offseason?
Yeah, well, they've already been discussing what they learned during that time. I mentioned it a little bit earlier about being targeted. We didn't have the targets on our back this last year. And so we went on this tremendous winning streak and feeling that momentum, and then you lose a match and then you lose another match and then you start, inch by inch start questioning or start doubting yourself. It was unfamiliar territory for us. Even if they knew they had what it took, you're still facing some of the top competition in the United States. The Big 12 finished as the number 2 conference in terms of amount of teams that got into the NCAA tournament, and we went the furthest with the most teams, so number 1 in the conference. So there were no easy days, and I think there was a lot of learning taking place of settling down and stop doubting ourselves and then competing. And that's why I think we finished on a high. Even if the wins didn't come, we were playing those teams closer than some of the postseason teams in the tournament. So I think us recognizing what it feels like to be in that position, only one way is through it and experiencing it for yourselves. And I think we did that.
An example of that would be like Abby Schomer's setting as a freshman all year, and then like Emily Wilson and taking that next step. Speak of the growth of those 2 players and other players that you expect to see that growth pay off from last year.
Absolutely, they took on new roles. You had Abby Schomers, who had set for her high school team in a 5-1, and then spent a year understudying to Amber Olsen. And while she was learning and studying film and competing day in and day out, she knew that she was redshirting. And so then all of a sudden stepping into that role, that's no easy task. and then actually had sustained an injury right before the first conference match. So playing through that the entire season, you know, and ending up with surgery on the after season, that was no easy mix. That was a mental grind. I commend her for the mental stability that she had to possess during that whole stretch, more than anything, as much as the physical that she put into. So she's stepping into a new role, and same thing with Emily Wilson stepping into, as we've said many a time, you don't replace a McKenna Melville, and we reminded her of that. She doesn't have to be, she needs to be the best Emily Wilson that she can be, and that's every player on our team is Emily Wilson brings things to the table that McKenna didn't. And so we were pretty lethal behind the service line. We were nationally ranked behind the service line in big part to Emily Wilson last year. And so it was really bringing out the best and maximizing the strengths of the players that we had. And this year will be no different.
When it comes to the schedule, are you glad to get some of those road teams from a year ago here this time around?
Oh, absolutely. For sure. And same thing with the travel, you know, it's with our conference spreading coast to coast, time zone to time zone. We're definitely excited for some of them to come our way and not have to go 3 time zones too much this year.
To get off to a good start, how important will that be for this group if you're going to be changing a lot of things and mixing stuff up?
Well, I think very critical, but also we have a different format than we did last year. We would go to play one opponent back-to-back days, win or lose. And now we'll have that day in between, which was more familiar to us for those who have been here and part of the American in the past, where you have a day to go to a somewhat close opponent to the next, Kansas State, Arizona State. So it's not like we're going back and forth time zones or anything like that. But regardless of what happens, you have to regroup and now prepare for a different opponent. So I think we can wrap our heads around more familiar territory from the past, and you get a chance to face a different opponent earlier in the season versus later in the season. And that's something that I think gives us an advantage, you know, versus playing the same team, you know, whether you have your own team available or not.
One other aspect of the schedule has been the travel mileage you'll log in during the preseason home openers until September 19th. Just tell us what it was like putting together this non-conference schedule, including that late one against Florida, and what do you think it will take for this team to kind of get off to a good start given so many road games to start off with?
Sure. This was definitely the most difficult scheduling that I have had to undergo as a coach in the past, and talking to some coaches who have 15, 20 years even on me, they said the same thing. And I think with the restructuring of conferences, especially them going coast to coast, why would we want to travel 3 time zones in the preseason if we're already going to have to be doing that during our conference? So I think it's definitely regionalizing or shortening that distance that we want to travel. But even though we're on the road, we're still in state, so the travel won't be nearly as grueling, but we're still going to have to play on somebody else's surface. And so for us, it was a very difficult task to get scheduling, because there's a lot of teams with that Big 12 patch on your shoulder. There's a lot of teams that just are going to run scared from you. So it was challenging from a sense of either teams don't want to play you, but you're also cutting off about half of the United States in your options because of wanting to limit that travel and the grind that, you know, having to switch airports, having to, deal with elevation and whatnot, and then turn around and produce and jump at max capacity. So it was challenging, but we got it done. And, you know, for us then, our team knows one of our biggest core values is always, or common threads, is being adaptable. You know, you got to play. At the end of the day, you got to show up and play. And so we'll be ready for it.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Coach.
Thanks, Coach.
No problem. Thanks, everybody.